You know, if it's not about sports, I find it very hard to concentrate.
In 2008, a high school football player named Kevin Hart tricked an entire small town into believing he had earned a Division I scholarship to the University of California at Berkeley, commonly known as Cal. But how did he do it? What was the fallout when his lie was exposed? Well, you're about to find out. Let's dive into it. Kevin Hart grew up in Oakley, California, a small city in the San Francisco Bay Area, only about 50 miles away from Cal, and young Kevin grew up watching Cal football on TV, as well as other Pac-10 games. He would invite his buddies over to watch games, with the kids huddled around the TV, cheering on the Golden Bears, or watching whatever other team happened to be on the TV that day. Much like myself, Kevin fell in love with the game of football at a young age. But due to his large size, he was not permitted to compete in Pop Warner, as the organization had a weight limit for participants. So Hart decided to opt for playing flag football instead, which was the next best option. By the time Kevin was a teenager, his father and mother decided to move him and his siblings to a small town in western Nevada, called Fernley, Nevada. Fernley was one of those one-stoplight towns with not much in it. At the time that the Hart family settled in, the town only had around 13,000 folks living there. Fernley High School had never had a Division I football prospect, and very few players from the Vaqueros were even good enough to make a junior college roster. It was your traditional small town. You grew up, played sports, settled for a blue-collar job, raised a family, then died. It certainly wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. However, Hart did not want to be just another small-town bum that got stuck there forever. He dreamed of playing Division I football, and eventually the NFL, and he wanted to be the first from Fernley High School to make that happen. But Kevin was struggling in Fernley, struggling to adjust and struggling to make friends. It didn't help that his aunt, who used to take him to Oakland A's baseball games, died of cancer. But on the bright side, high school football had no weight limit, so Kevin could play. The only problem was he wasn't very strong or fast. Kevin's own grandpa, George Hart, said that the kid couldn't even bench 100 pounds. But Coach Dave Hart, no relation, saw potential in Kevin. The coach was hell-bent against passing, relying heavily on the run, and he needed big boys up front to block. So he recruited Kevin to join the team. Hart was a big, goofy kid, with one of Fernley's linebackers remarking that he couldn't believe that he was only a freshman, being in awe of his size. After Kevin's freshman season, head coach Dave Hart was fired and replaced with Mark Hodges, who was a lot more strict. He was a no-nonsense coach who required weightlifting, off-season workouts, and 7-on-7 drills. Hodges saw Kevin Hart and took in all 6'4" and 325 pounds of him, and although he could tell the boy was a bit uncoordinated and not too strong, he saw potential in him. Coach Hodges immediately gave him a dieting and weightlifting plan, and Kevin got to work on both, and soon he was squatting as much as 500 pounds. And soon it wasn't just his body that was transformed, but his mind too. He was back to his loud, outgoing self that he had been when he was living in Oakley, and helping in that change in Kevin was offensive line coach Chris Cribbs, a former guard at Western Oregon University who later spent time in NFL Europe. Cribbs told the group of offensive linemen that his college number was 77 and that no one in the room was qualified to wear it. Kevin Hart told Cribbs that he would prove to him that he was qualified to wear it, and he did exactly that. Before long, Hart was wearing a Fernley jersey with a number 77 on it. Hart had gotten to under 300 pounds, lifted weights regularly, and even practiced and played with injuries. He was showing his dedication to the game of football. Kevin Hart stated that Cribbs was like a second father to him, and with Cribbs' guidance, he was named All-State his junior season. His name appeared on some recruiting services, and in April of 2007, Hart began to receive a few recruiting letters from D1 schools, such as Washington, Oregon, and Nevada. But Kevin's grades were a bit of an issue. Well, more than a bit. He was maintaining a lowly 1.8 GPA. Fernley only required a 1.5 GPA to be eligible for athletics, and Kevin was barely getting by. But despite that, recruiting letters continued to pour in, and it wasn't long before Kevin began calling himself D1, a nickname that quickly caught on with his friends and teammates. Kevin wasn't arrogant, but he was proud of how far he had come as an athlete. Despite the fact that the letters weren't scholarship offers, but rather nondescript recruiting letters that were likely sent out to tens of thousands of high school kids, it meant something to Kevin. and he began to let himself envision a future where he played D1 ball, and then was drafted into the NFL. For a small town kid, they were big dreams. It's important to note that these, quote, recruiting letters were essentially just form letters sent to thousands of high school players and mailed in bulk. But to Kevin, they represented the first step of his dream coming true. And so, he took a recruiting visit to Seattle, Washington for an unofficial visit to the campus of the University of Washington. Kevin later said, quote, "I went up there and I liked it, but I didn't really think they knew who I was very much. So I sent them a tape and my transcripts, and that's probably why I never heard back from them again. I'm pretty sure it was my transcripts," unquote. I have no doubt that the transcripts were probably a big reason for that, but it wasn't just the transcripts that were an issue for Kevin. Another big reason was that despite his size, Kevin's footwork and upper body strength just wasn't very good. Not to say that it was bad, but more so that it was average, and maybe good enough to make a D2 team or a D3 team, but D1 was pushing it. Even Kevin's high school teammate and good friend, linebacker Zach Betts, had his doubts. Betts said, quote, "I'm not going to lie. I'm his friend and I care for him, but I did doubt him," unquote. I think at some point Kevin probably realized himself that he wasn't athletic enough to keep playing post-high school, and there's no shame in that either. Most people are not good enough to make a college roster in any sport. But Kevin decided that instead of pivoting to something else, he would just keep visiting colleges. He went to Oregon and talked to their offensive line coach, and then visited Nevada. The Nevada coaches were seemingly the only ones that were honest with Kevin, because they told him he could potentially try for a walk-on spot, but even at that, it was unlikely that he'd make the roster. And Nevada wasn't even a Pac-12 school either. They were in the Western Athletic Conference at the time, which was back then one of the lowest FBS conferences. But when Kevin returned to Fernley after his campus visits, he began his series of lies. He told his buddies and family that he had hung out with Nevada players at their dorms, and that every school he visited wanted him, which was far from the truth. He had been receiving letters from schools, so his friends and family believed the lies. The thing they didn't know was that the letters were just nondescript form letters. He did an interview with the Fernley High School newspaper called the Vaquero Voice, where he claimed that half a dozen schools were actively recruiting him, and that Oregon and Washington had offered him full-ride scholarships, which was untrue. At this point, he was in too deep. He had now allowed his lies to be officially published. This was not good. If he was to turn back now, he would have to admit to everyone that he was lying, and the school newspaper would have to issue a retraction, and he'd likely face ridicule from his teammates and classmates, so he couldn't stop. He had to keep lying. Kevin later reflected on how he had an easy out by saying that he couldn't play college ball because of poor grades, which actually was true. At least the poor grades part was true. But the issue was that he had been telling his coach, Mark Hodges, that his grades were perfectly fine. So in order to take that route, he would have to admit to Hodges that he was lying about having good grades. So he was backed into a corner. He had to keep the charade up. His senior season was successful on the field though. Kevin was named the state of Nevada's top offensive lineman, and Fernley made it all the way to the semifinals of the state playoffs, before ultimately losing by a point, which ended Kevin's high school career. And by January of the following year, with just a few months left of his senior year of high school, Kevin made one of the worst decisions he could have made. He decided to hold a news conference to announce his decision of where he would play college ball. He got his head coach Hodges on board, his offensive line coach Chris Cribbs on board, the principal of the school on board, and his family on board too. Kevin had narrowed it down to Cal and Oregon, even though neither school had even offered him a chance to walk on, let alone a full-ride scholarship. And then something happened that almost completely exposed the lie before the press conference even happened. Chris Cribbs emailed Cal's offensive line coach thanking him for helping to get Kevin a full-ride scholarship. The email that Cribbs received back nearly collapsed Kevin's proverbial house of cards. The email said, quote, "Chris, I think there is some misunderstanding here. We have not offered Kevin a full ride. Are you sure he's not going to Oregon? Let me know," unquote. Cribbs confronted Kevin about this, but Kevin, thinking on his feet, replied that schools are not allowed to comment on recruits, which is obviously a lie. It literally happens all the time. Kevin went on to further explain that because they weren't allowed to comment on recruits, they had to lie to Cribbs and deny that they had even offered him a scholarship. I have zero idea how Cribbs bought this. This explanation was laughably absurd, but nonetheless, the press conference was still set to happen. Local news camera crews showed up. Coaches, teachers, family, friends, teammates, and random people from the community packed into Fernley's tiny gymnasium. And after some of the hoopla died down, Kevin said into the microphone,
I just want to say thank you to my family over there. I mean, everyone at this school has been so supportive of what I've been doing. And I decided that I'm going to be playing football at the University of California.
And here's where things get bad for Kevin. Somehow, within the same night, Cal officials had caught wind of what was going on 250 miles to the east in a small Nevada town. They called Cribbs and informed him that Kevin had not received a scholarship. And not only that, Jeff Tedford, the head football coach at Cal, had no idea who Kevin even was before that night. Cribbs called Mark Hodges and they drove to Kevin's house to try to get to the bottom of what was going on. Kevin told them that he had been speaking to a middleman and not Jeff Tedford and Cal's offensive line coach. And he said it was the middleman, in fact, that had lied to everyone. The inevitable next question was, what was the name of this supposed middleman? Kevin had to think up a name on the spot and just said Kevin Riley. And as luck would have it, that just so happened to be the name of Cal's quarterback that season. Police were eventually called to investigate this supposed con man who had the same name as Cal's quarterback. But when Kevin was pressed by police to give them a phone number or address, Kevin couldn't lie his way out of it this time. And finally, he just confessed. He made the whole damn thing up. Kevin later issued a public apology and laid low for a week or two, avoiding school and going out in public. In a town like Fernley, where everybody knows everybody, it's going to be the talk of every barbershop and bar within a 50-mile radius. And Kevin couldn't show his face in public for quite a while. Kevin later said, quote, "When your whole life gets flipped upside down because of something you do, you don't know where to go," unquote. In Quincy, California, there exists a junior college by the name of Feather River College. The athletic director at the time, Merle Trueblood, read about Kevin's predicament and thought to himself that Kevin could use some friendship and support. And together with head football coach Tom Seamy, they reached out to Kevin. Seamy told Kevin that just like him, he also played offensive line in high school. Seamy was a fan of old school smash mouth football, and Seamy told Kevin that in just the past 2 seasons alone, 6 former Feather River offensive linemen had gone to D1 programs. And so, over the telephone, Kevin committed to Feather River College. Kevin was given the number 77, and in the second week of the season, Kevin saw his first game action. And in week 5, he had a crucial block that allowed Feather River's tailback to score. Unfortunately, in week 5, he also pulled his hamstring. And more bad news was on the way. It turned out Kevin had been skipping classes. He was never good at school, though 1.8 GPA in high school was indicative of that. And I'm not throwing shade either. I was terrible at school too, but I wasn't dumb, and I don't think Kevin was either. Some people just struggle to perform academically, but when you skip classes, obviously you're not even trying. So by the time his injury healed in week 8, he was academically ineligible. But he made the most of his time on the sidelines. He served as an assistant offensive line coach and worked to get his grades up and stopped skipping classes. By the time he got back on the field, he was ready to have a great season, and that's exactly what he did. He played so well, in fact, he earned a scholarship to a D2 school called Missouri Western. He played there and was able to achieve his dream of earning a scholarship to play football. And even if it wasn't D1, he still proved to himself that with hard work and tenacity, he was able to achieve a goal. So here's the thing. When it comes to any pursuit that takes a great deal of time and effort, whether that be athletics, making music, online content creation, or anything of that sort, the thing is that there is no easy way to the top. You will need to put in tons of hours, be broke and miserable for a lot of years, and eventually, with enough hard work, you can achieve your dreams.
If you want to do stand-up and you want to get really good at stand-up and be one of like the greats, quote unquote, okay, you're going to bomb a lot. There's going to be a lot of bombing. Probably for years you're going to be bombing and you're not going to make money off it and your life is probably going to suck. But if you persevere and you get to a point where you actually get good, which is difficult to do and there's a slimmer chance that you'll do it than most people realize, you will be greatly rewarded and you will be, quote unquote, a good stand-up.
Just like with anything that takes time and effort, you're bound to screw up along the way. And Kevin did indeed screw up. But this story isn't about screwing up, but rather what happens when you take accountability for your mistakes, make an honest effort to correct them, and then continue working hard to get where you want to be. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you hated it, leave a dislike. But either way, comment and subscribe. Peace out.
I can never ever find the right words, and there's no way this is real life. There's no telling you're the right girl, so I can only say that it feels right. It feels right, it feels right. Yeah, I can only say that it feels right. It feels right, it feels right. Yeah, I can only say that it feels right.